Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Welcome to the 5th episode of the 10th season of the Tom Petty Project podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Brown. This is the weekly podcast that digs into the entire Tom Petty catalogue, song by song, album by album, and includes conversations with musicians, fans, and people connected with Tom along the way. Last week's show looked at the barn-burning You Wreck Me, and we had some great comments on social media, as always. Over on Facebook, my associate executive producer, Paul Roberts, commented, "Lovely pod about one of Tom's best tracks. I'm surprised nobody has mentioned this, but that riff surely is based on Bo Diddley, as lots of others are. Nothing new in music, eh? The substitution of wreck for rock, great story, but I still think Tom would have got away with it. Think of Steve Miller with Rockin' Me, 11 out of 10. And first of all, thanks as always, Paul. Really appreciate your feedback, always. And I can see what you mean about the progression having a Bo Diddley-ishness to it. But for me, the groove is rooted far more deeply in the work of Chuck Berry and the Beatles than it is in the old blues masters, in my opinion. It has the role, of course, but it's still got plenty of rock to it. And I completely agree that Tom could have sold us on You Rock Me, but thank goodness he didn't settle on that line, eh? Nora Hayward Olson says, I've come to regard the Wildflowers album as, in a way, paternal. Sonically and lyrically, it's like getting a hug from your dad. A warm, wise, encouraging, sharing experience, and just a bit unexpected for those of us whose dads are of a certain age. The rockers of the album, which upon first hearing seem kind of jarring, I now see as necessary, because every parent needs to be fun and let loose occasionally. And I love this perception of this record. It's not one I connect with, but as I say regularly, this is the beauty of great art. It connects on deeply personal levels in very different ways for different people. And Nora's engagement with it works on that parental level, and that's very, very cool. She closes by saying, I always go back and listen to the song in a different way, breaking it down instrumentally than I usually do. I'm curious to see if any of the Wildflowers songs are less than a 10 for you. And I know a few people have raised this exact same point, and I'm obviously not going to show my hand ahead of time, but I will simply say that a 10 out of 10 album, for me at least, doesn't necessarily mean that every song is a 10 out of 10. Think of me what you will. Over on Twitter, my pal Steve Ursel comments, it's a hedonistic, joyful surrender to obsessive lust and a stunning contrast to the reflective vibe of the first 3 tracks. Great episode again. Thanks very much, Steve. Jeff Slate was superb, and I loved the discussion of Yes, You Do. Simple line, but it adds so much. First of all, thanks as always for listening, Steve. Again, it's massively appreciated. And if you haven't checked out Jeff's new album, The Last Day of Summer, you really should. It's a fantastic collection of songs that coheres into a wonderful overall listening experience. On Instagram, @CouplesRob wrote, this one is my mom's favorite. Why? Because my dad wore corduroy pants to her high school prom. And because it rocks, obviously. And that is fantastic. Remember when corduroy was absolutely the thing to wear? I had some pretty chunky corduroy pants or cords back in my teens, and I won't lie to you, although I'm hardly a fashionista in my 50s, I wouldn't be seen dead in them now. To wrap up social media this week, Lisa Kelly Pennington, after letting me know that she's 4-0 now on guessing my ratings this season, I suspect 5-0 after this week, commented, this is tied for Wildflowers for my favourite song. I was delighted to learn at the Wildflowers exhibit at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that it was called Mike's Song on the board until Tom got the right word in there. I'm always thrilled when the Dirty Knobs play it too. Like you, I never saw Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers live, so I know it's as close as I'll get. And I'd love to get to the Rock Hall sometime, and hopefully the Wildflowers exhibit is there if I do. I don't know if it's been brought back after its road trip down to Gainesville. If anyone knows, do let me know. And I'm really hoping that Mike Campbell and the Dirty Knobs do come, anywhere close enough for me to drive to see him play, in the next couple of years. Maybe on this next tour or the tour after. Mike, I'll drive like 10, 15, maybe 10. I'll drive 9, 10, and 10 hours, but flying down to some place where I could spend a couple of $1,000s, it's a bit of a tough ask. Anyway, look, let's get back to today's song and dive into the deep, dark waters of It's Good to Be King. In Conversations with Tom Petty, Tom tells author Paul Zollo that it's one of my favorite songs I ever wrote. And if you've ever read Paul's superb document of his time with Tom discussing his life's work, it's not a platitude he throws around generously. So, when he restates, I thought it was one of my best things, the one that had something to say. I tend to take him very pointedly at his word. Mike Campbell, in the liner notes for the Wildflowers and All the Rest release, agreed, saying, The words, melody, and chords are so good. It was definitely a contender for best song on the record. It's the first song that was written for the Wildflowers album, and when you think about this sonic and thematic direction, it only makes Stan Lynch's fit with that direction feel all the more awkward. I'm sure Stan could have played a solid part in this song, but it wouldn't have had the finesse and precision that Steve Ferrone brought to it, I don't think. Indeed, Mike Campbell commented that, I remember thinking this is Steve Ferrone at his best. It was right up his alley. All 5 minutes and 10 seconds were released as the third and final single from the album, and it reached number 68 on the Billboard chart and number 6 on the mainstream rock chart. Music critic Matt Greenwald called it one of the most self-effacing and personal songs to reach the top 10 charts in the 1990s. And when you think about the tone and content of the song, you would tend to agree with that assessment. 1995 was a big year for ballads, with Bon Jovi's Always, Annie Lennox's No More I Love Yous, and Van Halen's Can't Stop Loving You all seeing significant airplay and chart success. It's Good to Be King, by contrast, is an artist exploring very different themes, and again is an inward-looking song as much as it is an acerbic look at stardom and success. The song starts with a sublime drum fill from Steve Ferrone starting on the 3 count. The first note is a hi-hat choke, then he comes round the toms to land on the kick on the 1. Underneath that is a fantastic bass slide down to the root E. Then we get that beautiful, bright piano being played by Ben Montench. This is what drives the verses in the song. It's stark, sparse, and melodic, and it's just single notes. No chords or pairs of notes, and no elaborate pattern. It establishes the mood with one note, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. The rhythm guitar is panned all the way over to the right and just adds to that fantastic drum part that swings its way throughout this track. I love that Mike name-checks Steve on this one in Wildflowers and All the Rest, because it really is it's a very atypical rock and roll groove. You have those wonderful hat lifts that Steve throws in and the crisp, delicately tensioned crack of the snare with Mike Campbell's bass part rolling along underneath it all. It sets up an ominous, lazy suspense for 8 bars leading into that first verse when the piano falls away and we're left with just the drums and guitars. And Tom. The first words out of his mouth are, "It's good to be king." And I'm going to leave the lyrics for this one until the end, but I will have to touch on them here and there within the body of the song because of how interwoven they are melodically and rhythmically with everything else that's going on. Tom delivers that opening line in a very gentle, welcoming way, almost inviting us into the song and into the world that he's about to create. Michael Kamen's triumphant orchestration is very subdued in this first verse section, and you'd be forgiven for missing it. It's mixed down really low in the left channel, but it replaces the piano part that Ben Mont was playing and adds in a longing and quiet desperation to the track that would be missing were it not there. We'll talk a little about how the orchestration is replaced in live versions closer to the end of the episode, but for me, like the album's title track, there's something about the studio version of this song that surpasses even the greatest of its live performances. I think that the orchestration is a big part of that, and of course we'll talk about the finale a little later too. In the second half of the verse, the piano is brought back to accentuate the first beat of each bar. Again, just a really simple, descending 4-note run that leads us into that big push into the chorus. The resolution from the minor to the major here, from E minor to A major, just feels euphoric and epic to me every time I hear it. And though I'll talk about the lyrics as a whole later, as I mentioned, I think this first change here is extraordinary in the way that Tom undercuts the sense of elation in that major key change with a lyric that carries an undertone of real menace. Yeah, the world would swing, oh, if I were king. There's a sinister edge to that lyric that I do want to dig into later, but suffice to say, I think you can read the word swing in a couple of different ways here contextually. And in the chorus, Steve Ferrone again comes to the fore with a wonderful syncopated ride bell hit between each beat, and the song's elevated musically here by those exceptional harmony vocals provided by Howie Epstein. The blending of Tom and Howie's voices on this record, on those tracks which he performs on, are as important to the album as any other component, I think. Here, his voice adds to that mock adoring chorus that a king would expect, and means that you don't need a big swell of or a multitude of different guitar parts. So imagine this song on Into the Great Wide Open or being, produced by Jeff Lynne. We'd have a 12-string acoustic in there probably, and maybe a couple of electrics panned on each side playing complementary parts. And you know what? It probably would have sounded great. But instead, we have a vocal build with some more single-note piano in the background, mixed much lower than their intro counterparts. Now, the switcheroo into the second half of the chorus is really clever, as we get a little 2-beat bar, which brings the orchestra into play. We then have what feels like 2 bars of 4, but I'm going to contend the structure here is 1 bar of 4, then 2 bars of 2, then 2 more bars of 4. So starting with that initial 2-beat bar, I think the count is 2 beats, 4 beats, 2 beats, 2 beats, 4 beats, 4 beats. Why do I think those second 4 measures are actually 2 different bars? Well, it's to do with what the drums are doing after those initial 6 measures. It's kick, kick, then kick, snare. And if you count straight through, it just feels awkward. Now, I could well be wrong, and I guess in the grand scheme of things, whether it's 2 bars of 2 or 1 bar of 4 makes absolutely no difference to the count of the song. But to my ear, those 2 bars of 2 are very distinct from one another. And maybe that's the other reason why I count them that way. That orchestration, adding its voice to the song, really adds to the impact of this major key section. It's all paced and organized in such a way as to suggest majesty, but majesty with serious fault lines running under its foundations, which ultimately is what this song is all about to me, and another theme that Tom would revisit on later albums. There's a killer drum fill taking us back out of the chorus into the second verse. The tom sounds so incredibly full and present, but it's that double hit on the snare to end with the floor tom under the second hit that gets me. Almost any other drummer would have played tom and snare together twice, or possibly a snare and then a flam, or something different, but Ferroni just switches things up a little, just to keep you on your toes, and it's something that most drummers just wouldn't play that, and I just think that's so cool. The second verse here is the introduction of some harmonized vocalization to build that feeling of, it's almost kind of longing and quiet desperation. There's a super cool bass swell under the words bulldog barks that slides back up the neck before going back down, but not all the way. It's a really interesting lick from Mike and not one that a bass player would always necessarily play. I've isolated it here so that you can hear it. It's almost like a little lead guitar lick that he plays, but on the bass. And it's distinct from the type of bass licks that either Howie or Ron Blair ever play. So it's another facet of this album that makes it stand out from a lot of the rest of the work Tom did with the band. Now, I've always misheard the line, "You're out there with winners." And I had until, 3, 4, 5 years ago, whenever the box set came out and I sort of sat with it and read the lyrics. And you can forgive me for that, I think, because Tom bends that extra syllable to his will. Really blending the word into almost one rather than 2 parts. Winners. Like it doesn't sound like it has 2 syllables. I'd always thought it was, "You're out there with wings." It doesn't make any sense, I suppose, in retrospect, but there you go. But it's another example of Tom not worrying about the syllabic meter of a line if there's a word that he feels is really important to use to make the point he's trying to put across. Again, we get that build out of the verse into the chorus, again with the addition of more distorted guitar in the left channel, and those soaring harmonies flying over the top of that syncopated ride bell motif. Oh, and just the small matter of that immortal line, "I'll be king when dogs get wings." After another superbly restrained but musically perfect fill from Steve Ferroni, Mike Campbell's solo slides into your DMs like an ex-girlfriend just wanting to see how you're doing. And I don't know why I'm using that analogy, but I wrote it, looked at it, and it felt right, so I'm leaving it in. It's played over the top of the verse progression, and it uses a tone that I don't think most guitarists would necessarily go for here. There's just enough distortion on it to get a little crunchy, and the bass ends feels like it's been scooped off, with the mids pushed up a little bit to give it that very distinctive, sharp sound. The part, as you would expect from Mike, is just as tasteful and perfectly performed as you could possibly get. And I don't remember if he wrote the solo for this one or just sort of felt it and performed it as it came. I suspect it's the latter, especially once it gets to the end and he plays that little bluesy ending lick, which is so cool. Okay, folks, it's that time. It's that time that, again, every episode it comes, it's time for Petty Trivia. Your question from last week was this. On which of the following albums does Benmont Tench not feature? Is it A, Looking East by Jackson Browne, B, The Missing Years by John Prine, C, Highway Companion by Tom Petty, or D, Hackney Diamonds by the Rolling Stones? The answer, of course, is Highway Companion. In fact, the only musicians to appear on Tom's third and final solo album were Tom, Mike Campbell, and Jeff Lynne. That's it. This makes Highway Companion the only album Tom ever released as the primary songwriter, which did not feature Benmont in some capacity. Jackson Browne's superb Looking East features Benmont on the title track and fellow heartbreaker Scott Thurston on all 10 tracks and as co-writer on 3. The Missing Years by the brilliant John Prine was, of course, produced by Howie Epstein and featured musical appearances by Howie, Mike, Benmont, and Tom. It also features one of my very favourite John Prine songs, All the Best. Do give that a listen if you've never heard it before. The Stones enlisted Benmont's help with a pair of tracks from their 2023 release, along with cameo appearances from the likes of Lady Gaga, Paul McCartney, Elton John, and Stevie Wonder. It's a pretty big comeback album. Your question for this week sticks with the theme of session work. It's a little bit tougher. On which album, also featuring members of the Heartbreakers, did Wildflowers percussionist Phil Jones also appear? Is it A, Knocked Out Loaded by Bob Dylan, B, Belladonna by Stevie Nicks, C, Mystery Girl by Roy Orbison, or D, Land of Dreams by Randy Newman? Okay, back to the song. Coming out of the solo, we head straight back into the last verse. Now, there's a little anomaly here, and it's likely in my brain and not the album liner notes, but I can't see anywhere where it says that Benmont plays a Hammond organ on this song, but man, it sounds like there's one being used. Very, very quietly underneath those opening backing vocals, but I mean, I suppose they could have run the vocals through a Leslie amp to get that same sort of slight wobble to them, but I'm sure I can hear an organ there. You know what? I must be losing my grip on reality. I don't know. We get an even better bass slide from Mike Campbell at the halfway point of this verse. That's another central element of the song that I always wait for. And here's that one. In the second half, we get piano again, but higher up on the keyboard, and we have the orchestration playing a more prominent role here as it warms up its muscles ahead of taking over in the outro. We also get more just genius of arrangement. We don't get a final, yeah, I'll be king if dogs get wings. We don't get that line. We don't get, can I help it if I still dream time to time? Instead, we get the incredible parting gift of, excuse me if I have some place in my mind where I go time to time. And that line is the reason I think that we don't get I'll be king one more time. You can't follow that with this, nor should you. So Tom just cuts out that section from the chorus entirely. It's an unusual and pretty ballsy move to pull at this point in the song, but it underscores what an extraordinary vein of songwriting form he was in at this period in his life. This change in the chorus also means a change in the measure count. We get 2 beats, 4 beats, 2 beats, 4 beats, 2 beats, 2 beats, and then into that repeated section of 4 that leads us seamlessly into the outro. The last chorus ends at 3.5 minutes, and the song is 5 minutes and 10 seconds long, so this dog with wings has a very long tail. And it's not always easy to write something interesting that extends a song past what you would call its natural endpoint. To begin, the intro piano comes back. And the interesting thing here is that the guitar has now been switched over into the left channel and the piano's sitting in the right. It's all clean and crisp and caps off the song perfectly. Once that intro section is played through, most artists would either repeat that section to fade or just finish on a big chord that decays out. However, this track has one more very significant trick up its sleeve. Enter stage left, the genius that is Michael Kamen. As Benmont switches gears to play that arpeggiated triplet and the rhythm guitar holds its place in the left channel, Kamen's beautifully lush arrangement comes in over top of it all to add a mournful coda to the song. Breaking up its flow is another fantastic drum fill at around 4:22. As the drums cut out, you then have an ascending line from the orchestra that ends on a single horn, before we have that last little flourish from the wind and string sections. It's an ingenious way to end a track that has so much weight to it. By making the song slightly over 5 minutes instead of just under 4, it gives it a grandeur that it might otherwise lack. Of this section, Tom tells author Paul Zollo, that was just another good case of having a lot of talented people, and you've got a good piece of material, and then when you bring in all those people and they fully realize what I wanted to do, it really works. And that doesn't always happen exactly like that, but that was just a case where I sat back and felt, wow, this is so nice. Right. I said we'd talk about the lyrics as a whole, didn't I? In the liner notes for Wildflowers and all the rest, both Mike and Benmont seem to be quite defensive about the song lyrically, with Mike quick to point out that the lyrics are most definitely not misogynistic, which is really strange to me because I've never once interpreted them that way at all. Mike comments on this aspect of the song saying, I know it's got a little bit of a sweet misogynist thing, the part about being king helps him meet girls, but it's done with a tongue in cheek. And Ben Mont goes further, commenting, "It's not arrogant at all. It's a very wistful song. It was written from Tom's point of view that being a king never lasts." And I'd take that one step further, even saying that wanting to be king isn't an aspiration worth having in the first place. I think if you translate king to emperor and think about whether or not he has any clothes, you get a little closer to the truth of the thing. The first verse sets up an almost idyllic vision of success, not striving for any sort of power or control, but maybe just wanting a measure of notoriety or security. It's good to be king, if just for a while, to be there in velvet, yet to give him a smile. The second line, beautifully delivered by Tom, cements that notion. It's good to be a big fish in a small pond. It's good to be a king of your own little town. Sandwiched between those lines is, it's good to get high but never come down. And I know that on an album that has the most overt statement Tom ever made about getting high, that this could be interpreted, a certain way. But to me, it's always been a very desperately sad line. To want to never come down means that there's something down there that you really, really want to avoid. When viewed through that lens, this opening salvo actually becomes about running away from something or avoiding something. How can you escape your troubles? Well, become king. Have access to such resources that you can stay high and apart from that which ails you. I'd mentioned that the next line has a menacing undercurrent to me. Yeah, the world would swing, oh, if I were king. There's the more obvious use of would instead of could, for starters. That's definitive. There's no room for compromise or objection in that word. Then there's the ambiguous meaning of swing. I very much suspect that it means swing in a musical sense. The protagonist wants to make the world swing as he stays high to avoid his troubles. But in a darker sense, swing could also be inferred as being a reference to a noose. Another way of removing your troubles is by taking a scorched earth approach and just destroying everything. Now, I don't think this is actually Tom's meaning here, but I like that there are a couple of different angles that you can view this from. The last line, "Can I help it if I still dream time to time?" should have put paid to any suggestion of arrogance. If Tom is still dreaming of being king, then he obviously doesn't believe himself to be in that position right now. It's good to be king and have your own way. Get a feeling of peace at the end of the day. Again, there's security and success, but there's an ominous cautionary tone that creeps into the next line. When your bulldog barks and your canary sings, you're out there with winners. It's good to be king. When your bulldog barks and your canary sings. Well, dogs usually bark as a warning, and canaries were used in coal mines to detect poisonous gases and act as a grim, sacrificial alarm to miners. With that portentous line up front, you're out there with winners, it's good to be king, becomes sarcastic and bitter to me. Yeah, right, it's good to be king. Sure it is. Yeah, I'll be king when dogs get wings. Can I help it if I still dream time to time? So rather than falling back on the old pigs with wings idiom, Tom instead links the chorus to the verse by going with dogs. There's also that element of dog in the sense of a disreputable person. So when the unscrupulous people rise to the top, I'll be king. Again, there's a pretty dark inflection to that line to me. And I don't think I'm completely imagining that. It's good to be king and have your own world. It helps to make friends. It's good to meet girls. A sweet little queen who can't run away. It's good to be king, whatever it pays. This is the line that Mike was talking about and defending against accusations of misogyny. And again, is one I've never read that way at all. So the framing here for me is now external rather than narrative. Tom is now describing success in the way that it's viewed by other people. And rather than buy into this deeply flawed premise, he finishes by saying, "Excuse me if I have some place in my mind where I go time to time." It's a final, emphatic rebuttal of the idea that it's good to be king. It's the ultimate statement that art is the fundamental bedrock of who Tom is, and success is just a byproduct. Art is the truest expression of the mind. Success is the shallow fixation of the outside world. When the song's played live, it's often accompanied by an extended jam session between Mike, Tom, and sometimes or often Ben Mont. It's almost as if this opportunity to flex their improvisational performative skills as a band are used to underscore the theme that what you do is important, not where that takes you. Tom was as regal in his fundamental honesty as anyone you'd care to name. He just never needed to wear a crown for us to see that. For today's episode, I chatted to one of the hosts of the very first music podcast that I ever listened to, the Honest and Unmerciful Record Review Podcast. Weirdly, before I decided to start the Tom Petty Project, I hadn't listened to a single music podcast. And in retrospect, I do find that really odd and possibly a little bit stupid. And I don't really have a very good reason why it might be. But during the initial stages of feeling out how to take on this podcast, I connected with today's guest, Pete Nestor, who had shared his show's review of Wildflowers with me. It's also a significant album in his life. And Pete gave me some very good advice up top and sort of gave me a little bit of encouragement to push ahead with the Tom Petty Project. You'll remember that Pete was a guest on season 9, and we had a fantastic extra little chat about It's Good to Be King during that recording, which I'm very happy to share with you right now. Why did you pick this one, Pete? Because I'd sent you a note on this fairly early on when I decided I wanted to do this format for this album for this season. Why did you pick It's Good to Be King?
I think that first of all, thanks for giving me the chance to talk about one of my all-time favorite songs, which I guess I just answered the question. It is one of those songs that is just sort of breathtaking, and I mentioned this, I think, when we had our one-on-one interview. You know, it's the kind of song that you can't do it half measure. You have to own it, and you have to commit to it.
Yeah.
And I think that this song, you know, I think he mentions that. I think you mentioned at some point that he. There's something about this song being kind of in the middle of a dream and reality. And I can't remember where I read that. It's something that maybe was in the Zollo book or something. But it's so it sort of feels like you're floating. It sort of feels like you're in no man's land in a way. And so, being that the song is about a daydream, the lyrics also, I think, do such a good job of painting that picture, because he's not king.
Yeah,
he's pretending to be king, and yet he's just putting out this hypothetical, wouldn't that be something? But it's actually not reality. And so there's this cool kind of bait and switch that he does with this misdirection of the lyrics. So not only is the music ethereal and kind of in this middle ground of reality and maybe not really in touch with reality, but the lyrics are similar, where he's daydreaming about being king. And then he undercuts himself with, I'll be king when dogs get wings, you know, or, you know, the world would swing if I were king. Can I help it if I still dream time to time? So, you know, it's got this confidence, and yet it's this vulnerability. And I think the music and the lyrics are just so perfectly married together in that way. So for me, it's just it's an absolute gem on an absolute perfect album. And this is just, I think, his crowning achievement. And it's something I didn't know that I loved as much as I did until I went back and was doing my podcast and really dug deep into this album and recognized, I think, some of the nuances of this song that really, I think, make it special.
Yeah. When your bulldog barks and your canary sings, you're out there with winners, which doesn't rhyme, doesn't fit in the cadence, but Petty always manages to do it. It is a very, because the question I didn't know as a question, what do you take from the lyrics? And you've answered it already, but because it is one of those where it's quite, when you read it and just kind of read it as a piece of prose, it's like, what the hell is he saying here? Is he saying that it's good to be king? No, he's definitely not saying that. There's an irony here. Or is he saying, is it a comment on, you know, the guys they're 40 and they still wear their Letterman jackets and they think they're king, but really it's just good to get a girl. So there's all those different layers to it. But like you said, with that sort of unconscious dream state, sort of half asleep, half awake lens on it, then it just becomes this weird sort of disjointed, dislocated snapshot of an idea, which is, again, it's perfect, right? It's so clever to do it that way.
Yeah, I agree. And then, you know, again, we could get into the music, where there's just a real tenderness to it, and the orchestration on this song is just so expertly woven in, where you feel the swells and you feel it just comes at the right moment to fill in the sound, but the band is still very present, you know, so it doesn't overwhelm anything. It's just this beautiful bed that the whole thing floats along on top of. And Benmont's piano runs
oh my God,
on this are just stupid good. just, talk about fitting the song in every possible way imaginable. And I like the Ferrone riding the cymbals on the upbeats during the chorus. There's this precise touch that maybe really kind of cements why he was brought in and Stan was no longer there. And not to say that Stan didn't have swing. We've talked about in the episode that we did how Mary Jane's Last Dance is just, it's a swing and tune, man, and Stan just crushes it. But there's something just so precise yet fluid, and just the feel, baby. Ferrone on this song just absolutely just is the perfect slot. The percussion is just perfect on this.
And his drums sound good. Well, I mean, the drums on this album sound fantastic throughout. I was going to say too, because I'd written this down and I was making sort of my brief notes for this one for our conversation, that I think Steve Ferrone's second only to Stuart Copeland when it comes to drummers I love who can use cymbals really, really well. Their cymbal work alone is just like, wow. Because like I said, he goes to the bell in the chorus, but he's also he's hitting the bell and the ride in, not syncopated, but he's playing on both. And when you're a drummer, you know that it's not easy to do that and get your velocity consistent the whole way through. But of course, when you're Steve Ferrone and you play as much as he has, he brings exactly what the song needs, and he doesn't do too much. It's not busy, but it's perfect. You can't imagine any other part in this song.
And he's got that killer fill going between the chorus and then back into the verse again. There's just it's just great, man. It absolutely is the right part. Just such a precise touch that is fantastic. And then again, the Benmont and his piano and the triplets that he plays on the way out, the do 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 do, and it hits all the feels, as they say.
Yeah, it's got that too. It's got that, like you said, with the orchestration. It's not a feature. It's sort of just that backing until it gets to the end, and then the orchestration takes the lead. And again, I mean, I was talking to my friend Corey about this. Michael Kamen might be the best contemporary composer who's ever lived. Maybe. I mean, you can throw John Williams into that conversation, a few others. Tim Burton's mate, whose name has just flown from my mind now. Those are the three that I would say. But Kamen's work augmenting other people's music is just astounding. Like, for a guy who's got a classical background, and what's his name? What's the guy's name from Carpenter from Nightmare Before Christmas? And Danny Elfman.
Oh, yeah.
But Danny Elfman was in Oingo Boingo, and he had a pop background. Yeah. Kamen doesn't, and yet he understands these pop and rock songs just intuitively and knows exactly when to lay things up, when to let things breathe. And I'm sure there's some direction from Rick and Tom and that kind of stuff on there, but Kamen's was a genius. Love that guy's work.
Yeah, and I didn't know his work until, I take that back. Everyone knew his work. They just didn't know that he was the guy doing all that work. Pink Floyd's Comfortably Numb is Kamen, and I don't know. I remember I've looked this up in the past. I can't remember now, but you look at the stuff that he's orchestrated, and you're like, oh, that album, that classic song, that classic album, that band, and it's just absolutely incredible the stuff that he's done. Yeah, for sure. So what about Mike's guitar? I actually, one of the things that I've realized in listening to your podcast is that Mike Campbell is maybe a top 5 rock and roll guitar player.
Yeah.
And there again, I have gained an incredible appreciation for his work over the years, largely because of your other guests who have also kind of confirmed this recognition of the work that he's able to do. This solo for me, and I mentioned this on the podcast and got some static for it, maybe rightfully so. There's what I call the Running Down a Dream solo, from Mike, and I feel like he hits it occasionally where he just sort of finds that note on the high E string and he rides it for a bar or two, and he does it here, and it's one of those things that once you hear it, and maybe I've now ruined a generation of listeners. Once you hear it, you kind of can't unhear it, and it's something that he falls back into occasionally. You'll hear it on Running Down a Dream. You'll hear it on Refugee, Supernatural Radio off the She's the One soundtrack. He does it here as well, where he just
yeah.
And so that's the one. It's like the one fault that I would put to this song. I just don't love that use of this solo in this song. I think the solo sounds great. I don't love that kind of 3 or 4 bar middle section, but then he kind of comes out of it and is able to and just absolutely seamlessly falls right back into the verse. But that's the one thing I would say, for all of the 11 out of 10s that this album has and this song is, that would be, the one critical piece that I would say. And it doesn't ruin anything for me by any stretch. I just find it a little bit of an unusual choice of texture, I guess, in this song.
And that's, again, this is why we love doing this, because we all have different takes on things. We all have, whether we're, I was going to say right or wrong, but that's just not subjectively, we just like different things. And if that doesn't hit your ear exactly right, you're not wrong in that, right? You can't be wrong if something jars you. It's just not possible. And especially when you articulate it, because that's where I always bristle. Oh, it just sucks. Well, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? Well, what exactly do you mean that it sucks? That's not a valid criticism. You need to tell me why it sucks. But it's that. I mean, I remember that when you listened to the Wildflowers episode that you did, and I thought, ooh, I wonder if this gets brought up on Tom Petty Nation, Pete might be in for a bit of heat on this one. So
right. And I don't go looking for conflict by any stretch. I think if you've listened to our podcast, the Honest and Unmerciful podcast, we're pretty conciliatory and positive 99.3% of the time. But yeah, this was one time when I decided to try and lean into the Honest and Unmerciful title just a little bit. So.
I mean, within the context of, within the context of the episode that you did on Wildflowers, it was the first album and one of the very few that you gave a 5 out of 5 to.
Yeah.
So
that's true.
Still, even one small part of one song isn't going to, it's not going to have an impact on a whole album. So.
Right. Exactly. There's no single album where every single note is in the right place. This one comes as close. This album comes as close as any other in my mind. To being that album where every note is in the right place and is very particular, and yet feels very organic and natural and flowing. And that's certainly true of this song. Again, it's got this weird juxtaposition of being so overblown, yet so delicate, and so particular, and yet so comfortable. All those things that shouldn't go together that somehow all do just absolutely perfectly in this song.
And we talked about it, when you were on for the full episode, that it should be too long, this record, in some ways, because there are some longer songs on there. 15 songs. It's weighty. It's a lot of things. But when you sit and listen to this album, just put it on, it never drags. There aren't any dips. You're not looking for, hopefully it picks up again here. That moment never comes. Because and again, it's 18 months to record roughly. Maybe a little bit more in terms of songwriting as well, but definitely worth the real sort of painstaking labor that they went through to get exactly the right sound. And speaking of exactly the right sounds, you talked about that great little drum fill. There's also that fantastic little bass when he does that big slide, which is Mike Campbell playing bass on this song.
Is that Mike Campbell? Yeah.
So again, not only one of the best, lick writers in rock and roll history, not only one of the best stage guitar players, really damn good bass player too, when he needs to, as was Tom.
Yeah, that's right. And you can, like you say, you just don't want this. It never dips. You don't want the album to end. You don't want the song to end. I hate the fact that it's a 5-minute song, because I would like it to be a 6-minute song or a 7-minute song. I just love, again, if you're in the right headspace, there's a long drive that I take a lot of times over the Lake Pontchartrain Bridge here in New Orleans. It's a 24-mile long bridge. And I often put Wildflowers on when I'm crossing that bridge, and if it's at night, you're sort of zoning out. Hopefully you've had enough caffeine where you're not super zoned out, but you're coming back from an evening in town or whatever, and this song just plays, and you can just kind of, you feel like you're in the middle of one of those YouTube videos where they just keep repeating the same 5 seconds of artwork over and over again, and you're just kind of like, lo-fi songs for studying or whatever. I can just sit there and just listen to this song and just listen to that fade out, and just feel so warm and so content. And it's just, again, a testament to Kamen's ability to absolutely find the right music for the right song.
It's great too, right? Because it fades and then you think it's done. And then you
Yeah.
get that final last little twist, and it's that really cinematic thing. You can almost think like, oh, he's waking up now.
Yeah.
He's waking. That's the bit where he's like, oh, it's kind of coming to and rubbing the sleep out of his eyes after this dream. It's again just inspired. It was played, I think it's the 15th most played song live, 285 times by the Heartbreakers on setlist, which is missing a few, but so
Sure.
it's in that range where the band liked this one. It was played as part of the three pack of Wildflowers songs in the middle of the set on the 40th anniversary tour. And then you're talking about You Never Want to Stop Listening to the song. Well, the version on the Fillmore releases 11 minutes and a bit, something around there, and they just jam out, right? And again, it's a song that's built for that as well. You can let Benmont take a 2-minute little piano noodle if he wants to, and you can let Mike do his thing, and you can let Scott Thurston do something if he needs to,
Yeah. The ace in the hole, Scott Thurston.
We don't talk about Scott, and then he doesn't come up that often as people's favorite heartbreaker, but when you look back at his CV, like I was, if I ever got to talk to Scott, I mean, one of the first questions, and he probably gets sick of answering, is, what was it like being with Iggy Pop?
What was it like being in Iggy Pop? Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And what a difference going from that, what you assume must have been chaos, to this established band who's, they're happy on the road. They're not doing coke and they're not hanging out of hotel windows or anything. They're just kind of getting on with making music. Must have been a lovely environment to come into for that guy, right?
Well, I think about Pat Smear in that same way. The Nirvana fourth member at the end, who then became Dave Grohl's trusty Foo Fighters compadre, and he comes from a punk background as well, which I guess is kind of where Dave Grohl came from too.
Yeah.
But the ability to, maybe that's not kind of the same level of skin changing chameleonship that Scott Thurston went through, going from Iggy Pop to Tom Petty, but it's in that same ballpark. And it's pretty impressive to see that musical legacy and the amount of the capabilities that he has, and the multi-instrumental capabilities that he has that, like you say, doesn't get talked about near enough.
Swiss Army knife, that's what they call him, right? I mean, harmonica, keyboard, can play bass, can play rhythm, can play
great harmony. Yeah.
Like that version of Walls, I think it's the PBS special, when Tom comes out and he's got the black polo neck on, and he comes out and goes, everywhere I look, it's me. And he does that. That's the lead in.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Scott's harmonies on Walls on that are just transcendent to me. Like, again, that's one of those, that's my definitive version. I always ask the question, Walls Circus or Walls number 3? Well, the one I listen to the most is that one.
Yeah.
Because his harmony on that is just, oh, my Lord. Yeah. Got a little love for Scott Thurston. It's good.
Yeah, there we go. Nice.
It's funny that you mentioned Comfortably Numb with Kamen, because when you listen to that version on the Fillmore, it kind of has a feel of Comfortably Numb when they sort of extend that section out and they're, the soloing and whatnot. And I saw Comfortably Numb live. I saw the Pulse tour at Earl's Court in London.
Oh, nice.
It was, again, one of those experiences you're like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. Yeah. And so there's a bit of that in that section of that song when they extend it out, that you get that kind of, it's almost got a sort of a looseness to it. And sloppy's not the right word, and people take that word the wrong way sometimes, but it's got that to it where it's very improvised, but controlled, because they all trust each other and they all know where everyone's going. And again, you've been on stage with people, just nod, just do 4 more. You take 4 more beats, or take 8 more, and then I'll solo or whatever, right?
I wish I was good enough to figure that out while I was on stage, but I hear what you're saying. Yeah, there's definitely a cool ability for them, as has been historically said over and over again, the Heartbreakers' ability to play off each other and to recognize when, you take that for another 4 bars. I don't want to stop Benmont. He's in the groove. He's in the headspace right now. Keep going, and we'll come in when it's time to come in. That's a special bond between those guys.
Right on, man. Well, hey, listen, thank you very much for jumping back on with me to talk about this song. It's a song that, again, I think was one of the ones, when I listened to Wildflowers, and Wildflowers took my feet out from under me when I started listening to Petty. And it was the album, I've said before lots, that it was the album that really converted me into a huge Tom Petty fan. This is one of the songs that really drove that knife home, because it is one of those songs you think, on an album that's got so many high points, how is this slow, kind of lazy, dreamy thing. How is this a high point? How is this a standout? But it's just so perfectly crafted and constructed and produced and played that top table,
Yeah, and as as a rock and roll fan, a lot of times I'm drawn to the more energetic tunes, and it's not going to say that I don't love Dream On just like everybody else does by Aerosmith, and there's always going to be opportunities for the slow songs to catch you as well. But typically I don't fall for the slow songs as hard as I fall for this one, and just as you say, for all those reasons, just so well put together, perfectly constructed, and has a lot to say, man. And it's a good time. It's a good one. Thanks for having me on again. I appreciate the opportunity, and definitely I'll always pick up the phone when the Tom Petty project comes calling.
Good, because we will be coming calling again. I guarantee you that.
Beautiful.
Okay, Pettyheads, that's it for this week. There's a world weariness to this song that hit me hard the very first time I heard it. And I think the impact of that was amplified for me because the piano is so beautifully played, captured, and so prominent in the song. And as piano is my first instrument, I'm always drawn to songs that are built around the instrument. And though I know It's Good to Be King was written on guitar, the part that Benmont plays is so good, it takes over ownership of the song in my mind. In fact, between the piano and the orchestration, and aside from the solo, you can almost forget that there's a guitar in this song at all, until you think, oh wait, yeah, no, it's definitely there. The gravity of this song, especially as the first one Tom wrote for what would become Wildflowers, is absolutely incredible to me. There's nothing flippant or accidentally coy about it. There's nothing arrogant or misogynistic about it either in my mind. It's simply laying out a thesis that fame and success are not worth chasing for their own ends. They're not what you should be focusing on. In this regard, you could view this as a companion piece to You Don't Know How It Feels, albeit on opposite ends of the tonal spectrum. It's Good to Be King? Come on, it's easy. 10 out of 10. The Tom Petty Project is a proud member of the Deep Dive Podcast Network. Go check them out on Twitter at Deep Dive, or us, I should say, not them, at Deep Dive Podnet on Twitter. I'm sure you'll find something there you like. I always say that, and it's true. You can also check out my other podcasts, Seaside Pod Review, a Queen podcast that I do with my best pal, Randy Woods. And you should also check out the Ultimate Catalog Clash that I co-host with the hardest working man in podcasting, and a good friend of mine nowadays, Corey Morissette. And as we heard from Pete Nestor already, you should check out this podcast.
Hey, look at you. Seems like you could use some album rock reviews in your life. Well, we've got them. The Beatles, Genesis, Billy Joel, Petty, The Police, Tears for Fears, Radiohead. What? Who put these bands together in a podcast? Well, we did. It's the Honest and Unmerciful Record Review Podcast, and we're on Spotify. Not your run-of-the-mill record reviews. We've got some twists that we think you'll like, all wrapped up in our nice and tasty warm burrito rating system. Confused? You'll get it once you listen. That's the Honest and Unmerciful Record Review Podcast.
There was no need for applause. We know it was awesome.
Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and YouTube at The Tom Petty Project, and on Twitter at Tom Petty Project. Go follow, like, subscribe, do all those things. And please do leave a review or a rating if you haven't already. Keep talking to me on social media, and I'll keep out reading your comments on the... Did I say that right? I don't know. I'll keep out... You know what? You know what I'm talking about. As a weekly reminder, the Tom Petty Project is not affiliated with the Tom Petty Estate in any way. And when you're looking for Tom's music, please visit official streaming platforms or go to your local independent record seller. Grab some physical media. Support local business. If you're looking for official merchandise, go to tompetty.com. And if you're looking for merchandise for this show, please go to tompettyproject.com. Don't forget to check out the Tom Petty Nation and Tom Petty Fans Forever groups on Facebook. And check out Tom Petty Radio, which is channel 31 on Sirius XM. Until we meet again next week, keep listening to and sharing Tom's music. Try to be kind. Try to say I love you to someone at least once a day. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll be back with you next week to talk about track 6 from Wildflowers, the melancholic Only a Broken Heart. Bye-bye.